This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, my name is Mitchell Langbert, and this is a Mitchell Langbert moment brought to you by the Glazov Gang. The two questions I'm going to answer today are first, why are colleges and universities left-wing? And second, can this be changed? My first answer is that they've always been left-wing. My second answer is no, they can't be changed without radical restructuring. If you look at the history of colleges and universities, they've always followed the party of big government. And if you define the party of big government as the left-wing party, then there's a natural affinity between colleges and left-wing ideology. The reason is simple. It's only through the big government party that colleges will maximize financial support. So there's a natural affinity between them and the big government party. In the late 18th century, it was the Federalists. In the early 19th century, it was the Whigs. In the mid-19th century to late 19th century, it was the Republicans. From the 1930s on, it was the Democrats. And each of these periods was associated with characteristic regulatory changes, social movements, or subsidization that aided colleges and cemented the relationships between the political parties and the colleges. So the Whigs were the party of the movement for public higher education. The Republicans passed the Morrill Act, the Land-Grant College Act during the Civil War, which gave huge subsidies to public colleges, mostly public colleges, some private. And the Democrats were the party of the New Deal, which provided subsidization to colleges, and also the GI Bill. So basically, there's a natural affinity, and this will be difficult to change. As the Democrats change, so the colleges will reflect those changes. And the simple fact is that the Democrats have moved to the left over the past 35 years, and so have colleges. That said, there was a deliberate shift in the administration of colleges that was consciously wrought by foundations and by the New Deal to make faculties more left-wing than they had been. Until 1875 or so, all colleges were Christian, and that includes the state universities. In the 1870s, you had the foundation of Johns Hopkins, and then, as Marsden points out in a famous book, that the colleges gradually broadened their interpretation of Christianity to become more and more scientific. But from the funding standpoint, there had been business interest in higher education going back to the early to mid 19th century, in the 1840s and 50s. George Peabody was one of the first major investment bankers, and he provided funding to Harvard and Yale. He established Peabody Foundation to fund education, and he met with Johns Hopkins about how to structure Johns Hopkins University. And basically, his mentee was Junius Spencer Morgan and J.P. Morgan, the son of Junius, who also took an interest in higher education and provided funding for colleges like Princeton. You also saw in the late 19th century John D. Rockefeller take a strong interest in higher education. He founded the University of Chicago in the 1890s. But the big change came, this culminated with the divvying up of the Carnegie fortune. When Andrew Carnegie gave his money away to a series of charities, one of them was the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which was headed by a former MIT president named Henry S. Pritchett. And Pritchett convinced Carnegie that it wasn't enough just to do what Carnegie wanted, which was to provide pensions free of charge to professors. Instead, what Pritchett said was use the pensions to restructure colleges. Carnegie went along with it. It probably wasn't his idea, but he went along with it. And Pritchett hired a management consultant, Morris Llewellyn Cook, who was a close associate of the founder of scientific management, Frederick Winslow Taylor, to redesign colleges. And they set up the credit hour system and separation of administration from teaching and so on. And these ideas, both the rationalized college, the rejection of Christianity and hence conservatism, were part of what the Carnegie Foundation was incenting colleges to do in the 1920s and 30s. This was also true of the Carnegie Foundation's sister foundation, the General Education Board, founded by John D. Rockefeller. So, for example, Reed College was encouraged by the General Education Board to become a liberal arts college. They hired mostly left-wing faculty, a left-wing president, and received ample publicity in the New York Times and other New York media very quickly. Even so, by the 1920s, while the top-tier colleges were restructured, and the idea was to restructure the top-tier colleges and the lesser colleges would then emulate them, there were still quite a few Christian and conservative colleges. Nicholas Murray Butler at Columbia was an example of a conservative college president in the 1920s. In the 30s, though, the New Deal cemented the efforts of the foundations to create a centralized hierarchical higher education system dominated by left-wing dominated faculties at the leading research institutions. This was done through subsidization of ideological advocacy by specific programs such as agricultural science, which was specifically funded by the Roosevelt administration to advocate New Deal policies among farmers, and indirectly through the funding of campuses and the construction of campus buildings at a wide range of colleges all over the country. So that was then capped off by the GI Bill, which vastly expanded colleges and cemented public sympathy for the Democratic Party. So that said, I don't dispute the commonly stated view that colleges have become left-wing since the 1960s because the anti-Vietnam War movement, which advocated the ideas of Herbert Marcuse, adopted a left-wing viewpoint and aimed to transform colleges into new left institutions. In fact, colleges have become radicalized to an even greater degree than the Roosevelt administration could have anticipated. But the simple fact is that without a major change in the Democratic Party, you will not see a shift in the radicalization of colleges. In fact, you'll see the reverse. And as we've seen in recent months, the association between politics and higher education is more pronounced than ever, with Bernie Sanders and other Democratic candidates advocating free college tuition. So if we are going to change colleges, we need to do so radically, and we need to do so under a Republican administration. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe to the Glazov Gang.